You will take the fall for every missing invoice, Nora. Elise already locked the files under your login. Smile through the partners meeting or clear your desk by noon. Hi, my name is Nora Greer, I am 28 years old. Those 3 sentences from my boss hit the conference room like a door slamming shut on my entire career. I stood there with the quarterly performance binder still open in my hands, the same binder I had stayed late 3 nights in a row to finish, and watched him lean back in the leather chair as if the conversation were already over. Elise Quinn, the HR manager, sat to his right with her tablet glowing, already scrolling through what looked like a termination checklist. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. 1 minute earlier I had walked into that room expecting a routine mid-year review. Instead I was being handed the blame for a string of fabricated consulting invoices that had somehow been routed through my system credentials. I tried to speak, but my boss cut me off with a short, sharp laugh. Do not waste time denying it. The audit trail points straight to you. Elise confirmed the timestamps last night. Elise did not look up. She simply tapped her screen and said, in that calm, practiced voice, "We have a signed acknowledgement form ready. Cooperation will make the separation cleaner." The words felt like ice water poured down my spine. I had never signed anything like that. I had never even seen those invoices until this morning when the finance clerk, Talia Crow, had quietly slid a printed exception report across my desk and whispered that the numbers did not match any project I managed. That exception report was the first real crack in the floor under my feet. Talia had looked pale when she handed it over, and she left the room before I could ask questions. Now, standing in front of my boss and the HR manager, I understood why. They needed a scapegoat before the external auditors arrived next week. My login had been used. My name sat at the bottom of every questionable transfer. And the only person who could have planted those credentials was the man sitting across from me, the same man who had spent the last 6 months praising my quiet reliability in every all-hands meeting. I forced my voice steady. Those invoices were never mine. I can pull the original routing logs right now. My boss's smile stayed polite and completely empty. You will do no such thing. Any further access attempts will be logged as obstruction. Elise has already flagged your account. Elise finally raised her eyes. The look she gave me was pure calculation. We recommend you accept the voluntary resignation package. It includes 2 weeks of pay and a neutral reference. Refuse, and the formal investigation starts today. The room felt smaller with every second. I thought about the student loans still sitting in my name, the modest apartment lease I had just renewed, the fact that Burlington did not have dozens of data analyst openings waiting for someone with a sudden termination on her record. My hands started to shake, so I pressed them flat against the binder. I want a copy of everything you claim I signed. My boss stood up, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. You will receive the packet by end of day. Until then, you are on administrative leave. Security will escort you out. Reed Blake, the external security consultant the company had brought in for the audit, appeared in the doorway as if on cue. He did not speak. He simply waited. My boss gave a small nod, and Reed stepped aside to let me pass. The walk from the conference room to the elevators felt endless. Every coworker I passed looked down at their screens a little too quickly. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was already buzzing with a calendar cancellation notice for the partners meeting I had been scheduled to present at. I drove straight to my father's house on the edge of town. Wesley Greer opened the door before I finished knocking, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without a word. He poured coffee that neither of us drank while I told him everything in short, jagged bursts. When I finished, he was already reaching for his laptop. Login credentials do not move by themselves, he said. Someone with admin rights moved them. We start with the access logs. My father had spent 30 years as a senior systems auditor for a regional bank before he retired. He still kept contacts who owed him favors. Within an hour he had a secure remote session open and was scrolling through raw server data that the company thought was locked down. The first anomaly jumped out almost immediately. My user ID had authorized a series of large transfers to a shell vendor that did not exist in any of our approved contractor lists. The timestamp sat squarely in the middle of nights when I had been asleep. My father zoomed in on the originating IP address. It resolved to a workstation on the executive floor, the same floor where my boss's office sat. A second set of credentials, belonging to Elise Quinn, had approved every single one of those transfers within minutes. My phone rang. It was my sister. Ivy's voice came through bright and concerned. Mom just called. She said you walked out of a meeting and people are talking. What did you do? I told her the truth in as few words as possible. There was a long pause, then she said, maybe you should just take the package. Fighting the company never ends well, and Mom is already worried about how this looks. Something cold settled in my stomach. My mother had always measured our family by how cleanly we fit into other people's expectations. If the story circulating was that I had been caught falsifying invoices, she would side with the version that protected her social standing. I hung up and turned back to the screen. My father had found something else. Buried in the email archive was a thread between my boss and Elise dated 3 weeks earlier. The subject line read, Contingency Plan, Analyst Exit. The body laid out exactly how my credentials would be used, how the HR file would be built, and how the partners would be told I had acted alone. At the bottom of the thread was a single line from Elise, once the voluntary resignation is signed, the audit trail can be cleaned. No one will dig further. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. The betrayal was not a sudden decision. It had been planned, documented, and timed to land the moment the external auditors arrived. My boss needed a body to throw in front of the train, and Elise had helped him build the tracks. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading, but inside the small kitchen the only sound was the soft click of my father's keyboard as he copied every file into an encrypted folder. I still had the exception report Talia had given me that morning. I pulled it out and laid it next to the laptop. The numbers matched the transfers my father had just uncovered. Talia had seen the discrepancy before anyone else and had risked her own position to hand me the proof. Somewhere in the company, at least one person still believed the truth mattered. That knowledge did not make the next hours easier. It only made the trap feel tighter. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a formal email from Elise Quinn. The subject line was Separation Documentation, Immediate Review Required. Attached was a 20-page packet that included a resignation letter already written in my name, a non-disparagement clause, and a final paycheck stub showing exactly 2 weeks of severance. At the bottom of the email was a single sentence, signature required by 5 o'clock tomorrow or the formal investigation will proceed without further notice. I looked at my father. He closed the laptop lid with quiet finality. We have the logs. We have the email thread. What we do not have is time. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Inside, the real countdown had already started. The email from the HR manager sat open on my phone like a loaded timer. My father and I spent the rest of that night copying every log and every message into 3 separate encrypted drives, none of them connected to the company network. By morning the pressure had already found new ways to reach me. My mother called before the coffee finished brewing. Her voice carried that familiar edge of social panic. People are talking, Nora. Your sister's friend in accounting said the partners are calling it theft. You need to sign the packet and make this disappear before it sticks to the rest of us. I told her the transfers were not mine. She cut me off. I do not care whose they were. I care that your name is the one printed on every report. Sign it. Take the 2 weeks. We can explain a quiet resignation. We cannot explain a criminal investigation. My sister joined the call from her own phone a minute later. Ivy's tone was softer but no less firm. Mom is right. Fighting them only makes you look guilty. Just take the money and start over somewhere else. This company is not worth destroying yourself over. Their voices layered over each other until I could barely separate the words. The same blood that should have stood beside me was already calculating the cost to their own reputations. I hung up without promising anything. My hands were shaking hard enough that the phone nearly slipped from my grip. An hour later, a text arrived from an unknown number. It was Caleb Mercer, a former systems contractor I had worked with on a hospital data project 2 years earlier. He had heard the rumors through a mutual contact at the audit firm. The message was short and direct: meet me at the old co-op parking lot. Bring nothing that connects to your work email. I drove there with one of the encrypted drives in my bag. Caleb was already waiting, leaning against a rusted truck that looked like it had never seen a company garage. He did not waste time with greetings. Your boss has been moving money through shell vendors for months. The invoices they pinned on you are only the latest batch. I still have remote access to a backup mirror they never shut down. The full chain is on this. He held out a small black drive. Every approval from Elise Quinn is time-stamped. Every originating terminal belongs to Harlan Frost's office suite. I took the drive. The plastic felt cold against my palm. Caleb watched my face for a second, then added, "There is more." Derek Orth, the senior executive who signs off on the big contracts, received a private wire from one of those shells last quarter. The amount matches the exact total they are now blaming on you. If this goes public, the whole chain collapses. Your boss needs you to sign that resignation so the audit stops at your desk. The words landed with the force of another door closing. My boss was not simply protecting himself. He was protecting a larger structure that reached higher than his own office. I drove straight to the small office of Julian Ames, the attorney my father had called the night before. Julian was a quiet man in his 40s who specialized in employment and white-collar defense. He listened without interruption while I laid out the logs, the email thread, and the new drive from Caleb. When I finished, he leaned back and spoke in a flat, precise voice. They have already prepared the narrative. If you sign, the company controls the story and you walk away with almost nothing. If you refuse, they will accelerate the formal investigation and try to freeze any personal accounts they can reach through civil claims. The only clean path is to force the evidence into the open before they lock the doors. He slid a single sheet across the desk. This is a formal notice of intent to preserve evidence. Once I file it, any further deletion of files becomes spoliation. It buys us a narrow window. Use it carefully. I left his office with the notice in my bag and the 5 o'clock deadline still ticking. On the drive back, my phone lit up with a new message from Elise Quinn. The language was colder than before. Failure to return the signed packet by the stated time will result in immediate referral to external counsel and local authorities. Your continued access to company systems has been revoked. Any attempt to contact current employees will be treated as interference. The threat was no longer subtle. They were prepared to turn the entire weight of the company against me the moment the clock ran out. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and sat with the engine off, staring at the 2 drives on the passenger seat. One held the original logs my father had pulled. The other held Caleb's deeper archive. Together they formed a complete map of the money trail, from my forged credentials all the way up to Derek Orth's private account. The chaotic rush of the last 24 hours had left my thoughts jagged and incomplete. One moment I felt the cold clarity of proof. The next I felt the floor tilting under me again as I remembered my mother's voice calculating the social damage. A second message arrived. This time from Talia Crow. She had used a personal email address I did not recognize. The subject line was only one word: tonight. The body contained a single sentence and an attachment. They are meeting after hours to finalize the narrative before the auditors arrive. Recording attached. Do not open on any work device. My thumb hovered over the file. The parking lot around me stayed quiet, but every second felt louder than the last. I opened the audio. The recording was short and crystal clear. My boss's voice came through first, calm and almost bored. Once she signs, the resignation letter becomes the official record. Elise will handle the system cleanup. Derek wants the hire transfers buried before the partners ask questions. Elise answered without hesitation. The packet is ready. If she refuses, we escalate to criminal referral by morning. The story stays simple. The analyst acted alone. There was a brief pause, then my boss again. Make sure security keeps her out of the building. I do not want her near any terminal. The recording ended with the soft click of a door closing. I sat in the quiet car with the phone still in my hand, the audio file open like a live wire. The 5 o'clock deadline was less than 3 hours away. The resignation packet waited in my email. The evidence that could destroy them sat in 2 small drives on the seat beside me. And somewhere inside the company, my boss and the HR manager were already writing the version of events that would erase me completely if I did not move first. My father called at that exact moment. His voice was steady but urgent. I just received a notice from the bank. Someone attempted to open a credit line in your name using the company address as verification. The application was denied, but the inquiry is on your credit report. They are not only framing you for the invoices. They are trying to make sure you have no financial ground left to stand on when this is over. The phone felt heavier than it should have. The countdown was no longer just about a signature. It was about every piece of stability I had left. The phone felt heavier than it should have. The countdown was no longer just about a signature. It was about every piece of stability I had left. I made the decision in the grocery store parking lot while the engine cooled and the 2 drives sat on the passenger seat like live charges. There would be no quiet resignation. There would be no clean 2-week package. I drove back to my father's house, handed him both drives, and told him to send every file to Julian Ames and to the external audit firm at the same moment. My father did not argue. He simply opened the encrypted session and began the transfer while I drafted one final message to Elise Quinn, the formal notice of intent to preserve evidence that Julian had prepared, plus a single sentence stating that all relevant materials were already in the hands of outside counsel and the auditors. I hit send at 4:58. The response came 9 minutes later. My boss called from a number I did not recognize. His voice had lost every trace of the polished calm he used in conference rooms. You have no idea what you just did. Pull those files back right now or I will make certain you never work in this industry again. I kept my own voice level. The files are already gone. The auditors have them. So does my attorney. He started to speak again, but I ended the call. The next message was from Elise Quinn, shorter and colder. You have chosen the difficult path. Do not expect cooperation from anyone inside the building. By the following morning the external auditors had frozen every executive terminal connected to the shell vendor transfers. Derek Orth, the senior executive whose private account had received the matching wire, was placed on immediate leave. My boss and the HR manager were escorted out before noon. Reed Blake, the security consultant, later told Talia Crow that the partners had watched the audio recording in stunned silence. The story my boss had constructed around my name collapsed in less than 24 hours. The invoices were reclassified as executive-level fraud. The resignation packet vanished from my email as if it had never existed. I should have felt relief. Instead, the next wave hit from the direction I least expected. My mother called that afternoon, her voice tight with fury rather than concern. Do you understand what you have done to this family? People at the club are already asking questions. Your sister's husband works with 2 of the partners. You could have signed the paper and let this stay quiet. Now our name is attached to a scandal. My sister joined the conversation seconds later. Ivy's words were quieter but cut deeper. You chose to burn everything down instead of walking away. Mom and I have to live with the fallout. Do not expect us to pretend this was noble. They hung up before I could answer. The silence that followed felt permanent. Blood ties that should have been the last safe ground had become another set of closed doors. Julian Ames negotiated a settlement over the next 2 weeks. The company agreed to a modest financial package and a neutral reference in exchange for my agreement not to pursue further civil claims. The money covered my immediate bills and gave me a thin cushion, nothing more. The real cost sat elsewhere. My name still appeared in internal audit summaries as the original credential holder. Recruiters in Burlington and the surrounding towns went quiet after the first round of background checks. The industry was small. Word traveled faster than any formal clearance. Caleb Mercer checked in once, long enough to say the backup mirror had been wiped clean by the company after the auditors finished. He had risked his own contracting relationships to hand me the drive. That bridge was now ash as well. Talia Crow transferred to another department and stopped answering personal messages. Even Reed Blake, who had only done his job, kept a careful distance. The people who had helped me survive the first 48 hours were scattering under the same pressure that had once been aimed at me alone. I packed the last of my things from the apartment on a gray Tuesday and loaded them into a used car I bought with part of the settlement. My father stood on the sidewalk and helped me secure the final box. He did not offer empty comfort. He simply said, "You kept the truth intact." That is more than most people manage. I hugged him once, hard, and drove west without a forwarding address beyond. A temporary rental in a smaller town 3 hours away. The ironic twist arrived 3 months later in the form of a short news brief. My former boss and the HR manager had avoided criminal charges through a quiet internal resolution. Derek Worth returned to a lateral role at a different firm. The company issued a bland statement about strengthened compliance procedures. The public narrative softened into a story of process improvements rather than individual accountability. The people who had tried to erase me kept their careers, only slightly dented. I was the one who had walked away with the smallest share of the wreckage and the cleanest conscience. I live differently now. The work I do is quieter, less prestigious, and completely my own. I sleep without checking email at 3 in the morning. When old contacts reach out with cautious curiosity, I answer only the ones who never asked me to disappear for their comfort. The relationship with my mother and sister remains a closed door. Some losses do not reopen. That knowledge no longer feels like a wound. It feels like a boundary that finally held. The lesson I carry is simple and hard-earned. When the people who claim to protect you demand your silence as the price of belonging, the only winning move is to refuse the trade. Walking away cost me the version of family I once trusted and the career path I had built with careful years. It also returned my name to my own hands. That exchange still feels uneven on some days. On most days it feels like the first honest ground I have stood on in a long time. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever been asked to sign away your truth so someone else could stay comfortable, where did you finally draw the line?